Hello, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil Reacts. I'm Mike King, and I wanted to take time tonight to talk about the Long Island serial killer case. The area that we're going to be talking about out on Long Island is also known as Gilgo Beach, and it became the disposal site for more than a dozen victims of the Long Island serial killer. He's avoided detection and, frankly, gotten away with murder for more than a decade. I personally have poured over so many documents and interviews in this case, and actually taking that back a few years ago when I first started looking into the case as part of a documentary series I was participating on Amazon Prime. My colleague, Greg Cooper, and I were invited to offer a profile on a killer who's known as the West Mesa Bone Collector in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Weirdly enough, that case had ties to the Long Island serial killer case. Now, in Albuquerque, the predator murdered at least 13 women. You can catch all my thoughts on that case by going to the Profiling Evil playlists and looking up West Mesa Bone Collector. And please make sure you check out my podcast on the case. You can find it on your favorite podcast platform. So let's look at this interesting serial killer case by starting with a news piece from News 12 in the Bronx. And please, would you just take a moment, hit the like and the subscribe button so that you're notified when we release other videos like this one? Let's watch.
Turn out of the news, and police say they have new evidence in one of Long Island's most notorious murder mysteries. I'm talking about the Gilgo Beach murders. Today, police released a picture of a belt that might have belonged to a suspect in the case. It was found near one of the sand dunes where police discovered 10 sets of human remains back in 2011. If you followed the case, you know it started with the disappearance of an escort named Shannon Gilbert. Police were looking for her when they uncovered the other bodies. They found Gilbert's body last, but authorities haven't linked her death to the others.
Well, the Long Island serial killer is also known as the Gilgo Beach Killer, and he has another name, the Craigslist Ripper. He's believed to have murdered somewhere between 10 and 16 people, but I suspect that there are many, many more than that. Now, investigating serial killer cases can be very complex and time-consuming. It's important to examine the different crime scenes, evaluate the forms of evidence, including behavioral evidence. This case is unique because it provides interesting clues from the initial contact sites, the possible crime scenes, and certainly the disposal sites. And of course, we're not going to forget the behavioral evidence that I hope it will become really evident as we explore this case together. Now, understanding who the victims are in this case is critical. We call this exploration victimology, or the study of the victim. Through this process, we learn not only who the victim is, but perhaps why they were victimized. That can often help us better understand who the predator is and what motivates the killer to take these victims. This process also gives us an understanding of the victim's lifestyle and the degree to which they may have contributed to their own victimization. And before you get stressed out about me saying that, I want to be very clear that I'm not blaming victims or victim shaming. What I'm trying to say is that each of us make decisions every single day that either can improve our personal safety or increase our risk of being victimized. For instance, let's imagine tonight you're leaving the shopping mall in the late evening. As you look across the now dark parking lot for your vehicle, you see that it's actually parked in an area where the lights are out. There's a group of suspicious people parked nearby. You immediately feel uncomfortable. So you're at an interesting decision point. Do you sojourn forward and hope for the best? Or do you go back inside and ask the store manager to have someone escort you to your car? Maybe call mall security. This is what I call decision-making risk mitigation. Well, as I've looked through all of the publicly available evidence in this case, I want to think about a couple of questions, and I want you to keep this in mind. First, why were the victims selected by the offender? Why was the crime scene committed wherever it was committed? Why was it committed in the manner it was committed? Why did the offender inflict the kinds of wounds on the victim that he did? And why was the victim left in this particular area? As we gain a better understanding of who the victim is and why they became a victim, we can begin to unravel and better understand who the most probable offender is. So let's start there. We can start by saying that this offender is probably a man. I'm going to back that assumption up based on the fact that the Suffolk County Police Department named the suspect Joe C. Now, the New York Times also reported that the suspect is most likely a white male in his 20s to mid 40s and familiar with the South Shore of Long Island. I always kind of smile because I think that this was shortly after the FBI released a initial behavioral assessment. And that 25 to 35 is kind of the average age for most serial killers. The fact that he's familiar with Long Island only makes sense. If he's dumped 10 to 16 bodies, he's going to drop them in a place where he has a better chance of not being seen. He understands the area. And it's also an area that he can frequent and make sure that everything still remains concealed. Unless, of course, he wanted them displayed, but we don't see any evidence of that. Well, the article goes on to say that the offender had access to burlap sacks, which he used to hold the bodies for disposal. The Times article further theorized that the suspect may have had detailed knowledge of law enforcement techniques and possible ties to law enforcement that may have helped him avoid detection. This is an interesting suggestion that makes me wonder what information the Times reporter might have had when writing this article. But bottom line is, I want to also introduce that all of the shows in true crime genre also teaches people what many need to do. We have to bank on the fact that today criminals, when they commit a crime like this, are usually disorganized and leave some kind of evidence behind. But think back to the 1960s when we first started recovering fingerprints. Even before that, it wasn't long until the offenders learned that they need to wear gloves or wipe down the steering wheel. So some of this may be education that sadly we're giving in this true crime genre. Now, I think we can safely assume that the offender is fixated on females who work in the sex trade and escort industry. These are high-risk occupations, and they provide opportunities for a predator to isolate the victims, to minimize the number of eyes that might witness things, and to gain control of them in positions that suit the offender, not the victim. Now, as we consider the most probable victims in this serial case, let's talk for a moment about the initial contact site, this place where the suspect and the victim first come into contact with each other. Now, and the victim may not even know that that contact has occurred. At first blush, it appears to me that the initial contact site was virtual. Online apps like that of Craigslist. Most of the victims were escorts from the Manhattan, Queens, and Bronx area, all boroughs within New York City. It would appear that the offender searched and selected his prey through that online catalog. It's really frightening to think about that, isn't it? I'm leaning toward this theory after examining the victims. I want to clearly state again that while their involvement in the sex trade industry may have contributed to their victimization, these women did not deserve to be victimized. And there's one man that we'll talk about. That said, there are certainly things they could have done to minimize the chance of being victimized. We're going to reserve that discussion for another day. But regardless, what's very clear is that the victims were victims of a predatory monster who savagely tormented and killed them. This, frankly, is one of the reasons I created Profiling Evil as a place where we can still remember and advocate for the victims of crime, even though their voices have been silenced. Let's watch this News 12 video on Gilgo Beach Unsolved. It's 10 years later, and we'll come back to the video a little later, and we'll talk more about the victims.
There's nearly a dozen murders and remains unsolved. Friday marks the anniversary of the first body being found near Gilgo Beach. It launched what remains one of the most extensive and mysterious investigations in the tri-state area. Tonight, News 12's crime reporter Eileen LaPalmer has part one of our three-part special series, Gilgo Unsolved.
It is now a decade since a Suffolk police officer and his canine Blue made a grisly discovery near Gilgo Beach.
His tail started waving. He started sampling the air. At that point, I saw the skeletal remains of a body.
Over the next year, the bodies or body parts of 10 more people would be found along the 3.5-mile stretch of beach, more than an hour's drive from Manhattan.
Well, let's start with Maureen Brainerd Barnes, a 25-year-old escort who came to New York City from Norwich, Connecticut. She advertised her services online when she was last seen on July 9th, 2007. She told her friends that she was heading into the city to spend the day, and she was never seen again. Her friends described her as a struggling mom who worked as an escort to pay the mortgage on her house. In fact, just 7 months earlier, she left the sex industry, but she had to return to pay bills after she received an eviction notice. Her body was found in December of 2010. Then there's Melissa Bartholomew of Erie County, New York. This 24-year-old went missing on July 10th, 2009. She lived in the Bronx and also worked as an escort, advertising her services through Craigslist. For weeks after her disappearance, her sister received taunting phone calls, presumably from the killer. Police traced some of the calls to 4 different locations, including one that was really interesting that we'll talk about a little later on. Megan Waterman was a 22-year-old escort from South Portland, Maine. She disappeared on June 6th, 2010, after placing advertisements on Craigslist. Her body was recovered again in December of 2010. And now, let me tell you a little bit about 27-year-old Amber Lynn Costello of North Babylon, New York. She was described by family and friends as a drug addict who supported her habit in part by working in the sex trade industry. She disappeared on September 2nd, 2010, after leaving her residence to meet a John who offered her $1,500 for a date. This is a great opportunity to take a moment and just remind you to go over to our Long Island serial killer story map to get additional information on this case. You can explore the map, learn more about the victims, about the suspects, about the locations. I think you'll really enjoy being able to go through that. You can find the link for the story map down below. Now, let's catch the rest of the News 12 report that we started a few minutes ago.
People who vanished from all over the East Coast and the tri-state area, including the Bronx, Connecticut, and Jersey City.
They're human. Both the bones that were found by the state police and the skull, they're both human.
The area behind me is a massive crime scene as Suffolk police continue to look for more bodies. What is sometimes forgotten is that the very first sign of the Gilgo Beach serial killer or killers was in April 1996. On Fire Island.
We saw a bag with a bone sticking out. As soon as we opened the bag, saw a red toenail sticking through.
News 12 has been covering these murders for the past 24 years. 4 dismembered women found from 1996 to 2003 in all parts of Long Island, miles apart. Those cases went cold until their other body parts were found in 2010 along Gilgo Beach as police searched for missing Jersey City escort Shannon Gilbert.
Her death was ruled by the medical examiner to be undetermined.
It would take 7 years for investigators to discover the body of Jessica Taylor of Manhattan. She went missing in July of 2003. This 20-year-old sex trade worker had also once lived in Washington, D.C., and she, like other victims, had been dismembered with her body scattered in several different locations. Now, I think it's really important right here to point out something. There are many investigators and online sleuths who have theorized that the offender cut up his victims. It might be true. I don't know. I've seen reports either way and nothing that I feel concrete about. But if true, this would be supported by forensic evidence. And so it's going to be backed up. I just, again, don't know how sure I am about the answer to that question. But keep in mind that scattered remains can be explained in a number of ways. Bones, clothing, other evidence can be relocated by natural land movement, water movement, weather-related influences like wind and snowmelt, or it could be the remnant of predation. That's when animals carry off the body parts. Now, we've already talked a lot about the victims in this case, but sadly, there are still many more. I'm going through as many as I can because they deserve to have their names and their circumstances acknowledged. My hope is that this keeps them in the news and keeps them in the forefront of our minds. We're talking about people like Jane Doe number 6. Do you realize it took 10 years for police to be able to finally identify her through DNA? Her name, 24-year-old Valerie Mack of Philadelphia. John Doe, the only male we know of so far, was discovered April 4th, 2011 on Gilgo Beach. He was very close to the first 4 bodies that were discovered in 2010. Now, Doe appears to be a young Asian male who died from blunt force trauma. It's believed he was working as a sex trade worker and was wearing women's clothing at the time of his death. This 17 to 23-year-old young man must have been beaten horribly. He was discovered with 4 of his teeth missing. It's believed that the victim lived as a woman, and it's believed he was been dead for about 5 to 10 years by the time they found him. Baby Doe was found 250 feet away from the partial remains of Jane Doe number 3. She was nicknamed Peaches from a tattoo. The female child is between 16 and 24 months of age. The body was wrapped in a blanket and showed no visible signs of trauma. Probably stuffed in the bushes and sadly just died from exposure. The child was forensically connected with her deceased mother, whose body was found 10 miles to the east. The toddler was reported to be a person of color and was wearing gold earrings and a gold necklace. Whether accurately tied to the same killer or not, there have been a number of other bodies recovered in the same area. Some do not appear to be connected, though, like the Hispanic or light-skinned African-American female who washed up on shore. In fact, that African-American woman who washed up on shore at Harbor Island, her torso was actually stuffed in a suitcase, and evidence supports that she had died of stab wounds. On 2 consecutive days, additional body parts of hers washed up onto shore. And in an eerily similar case, the New York Post reported that another person was found in a small suitcase on the shoulder of the Southern State Parkway. This woman, a 39-year-old mother of 3, identified as Tanya Rush. Well, the bodies just kept piling up. Victims like 19-year-old hitchhiker Tina Foglia of West Islip. Her dismembered body was discovered along the shoulder of Southern State Parkway. Then there was the Asian woman whose decomposed body was discovered in a sandy area near Oyster Bay. She could possibly be tied to the destruction that came from Superstorm Hurricane Sandy. So, again, we don't know. And finally, police have included 31-year-old Natasha Gilgo, who was last seen leaving her home in Queens. Her car was found along the Ocean Parkway, and some of her clothes and belongings were found strewn in the sand near Gilgo Beach the following day. What appears to me, though, to be kind of consistent is that the initial contact site for many of these murders is in Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. Now, this is an interesting twist, though, because the contact site was probably digital in nature, not geographic, bringing the MO, this modus operandi, to a non-geographic location, the internet or broadband network. It's still a location, but it's not like we're used to when we talk location. Well, to be clear, the initial contact site was more likely the online platform where this offender or offenders shopped based on physical descriptions. Well, let's talk for a moment about the actual crime scene. To me, it remains a little fuzzy based on public information, but it appears to me from a geographic perspective that it's somewhere between Manhattan and Long Island. Equally important, think about the fact that there was one case where a driver took an escort to a location out on Long Island. We're going to talk about that woman in just a minute. But think about the risk that these offenders or offender would have taken if they had an escort come to their home. There would be a record of it somewhere. By providing an address, the victim could have given the information to a colleague or a family member before leaving to meet the John. In my opinion, this is just way too risky, and I don't buy it. It seems more likely to me that the offender would have made the date and picked up the victim at some agreed upon location, then taking them to the site where he could act out his crimes, the crime scene. Again, think of the risk that that offender would have to take if he had a driver deliver the victim to his residence. Now, with that tidbit, let's focus our attention on the final crime scene, the disposal site. All of the victims were discovered along this narrow neck of land in Long Island known as Gilgo Beach and Oak Beach. It's a 15-mile stretch of ground that traverses Jones Beach Island between Jones Beach State Park and Captree State Park. There is one particular case that led to the discovery of the victims on the Long Island serial killer case. This case is important for a number of reasons, and I'd like to quickly review it. So let's start with this news coverage on the discovery or the case of Shannon Gilbert.
That was 10 years ago. A decade later, the disappearance and death of Jersey City escort Shannon Gilbert is still one of the greatest mysteries in the unsolved Long Island serial killer case. It was here in Oak Beach, in this private gated community, that Shannon Gilbert was last seen alive in May of 2010. Her last moments alive were actually recorded on a 911 call that she made as she ran from a home here. It took a year and a half to find Gilbert's body, and the autopsy was inconclusive. The police commissioner at the time, Richard Dormer, said it was likely accidental. Gilbert's family said it can't be a coincidence that her body was found near the bodies or body parts of 10 other people.
So on May 1st, 2010, at 4:51 a.m., the Suffolk County Police Department received a 911 call from a mobile device from a woman identifying herself as Shannon Gilbert. Gilbert was 24 years old, an escort from New York City. She told the dispatcher that someone was after her and that they were trying to kill her. A short time after making the initial call, a homeowner in the Oak Beach residential area also called 911. Stating that a woman was beating on her door, screaming for help. Several other neighbors reported this disturbance, but before police could arrive, the woman ran off and into the night. Well, that December, a police officer was on the parkway conducting a routine training session with his service dog, and he discovered the skeletal remains of a woman in a nearly disintegrated burlap sack. A subsequent search lasted 2 days, uncovering 3 more bodies in the same area, and led the police commissioner to say 4 bodies found in the same location pretty much speaks for itself. It's more than just a coincidence. We could have a serial killer. Well, less than 4 months later, in March and April of 2011, police recovered 4 more bodies in different areas of the parkway, this time near Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach. Over the course of the next month, they recovered additional human remains, bringing the total number of victims to 10. On September 20th, 2011, police released composite sketches of 2 of the unidentified victims, one described as an Asian male and a female named Jane Doe number 6. They included the photographs of the jewelry that was found on the remains of the female toddler that was found near her mother. Now, by November of that same year, police were theorizing they had one suspect, and they believed that person was the serial killer. On December 13th, 2011, now 19 months after Shannon Gilbert made her fateful 911 call, police discovered her remains in a marsh just west of the Ocean Parkway. Her body was recovered nearly 1/2 mile from where she was last reported seen. The medical examiner ruled that her death was undetermined, adding that she probably drowned. This finding was unacceptable to the Gilbert family, who hired a renowned pathologist named Dr. Michael Bodden. Bodden looked at the autopsy results and he discovered what he thought was something questionable with perhaps a broken hyoid bone. He also found it interesting that her body was found face up, which in his expert opinion was not common for drowning victims. The family requested Gilbert's 911 recording, and after a little bit of a court battle, they got those. They disagree with police findings that Gilbert was distressed when she made the call, reiterating she kept saying someone was trying to kill her. The Gilbert family lawyers appeared on a number of news programs regarding that 911 tape and possible ties to the Long Island serial killer case, something that the family and he believe was very poorly investigated. Well, first responders were unable to find Gilbert. Go back to that night now and think about that. She would be reported or cited as she ran from home to home, as we're seeing on this map. By the time police arrived, she had simply vanished. And I want to just shout out my friends at Nearmap for helping me with this 3D map so we can visualize the places that she would have stopped and where she was eventually located. The Long Island serial killer case went cold for another 4 years until December of 2015, when a new Suffolk County Police Commissioner announced the introduction of the FBI back into the investigation. This happened shortly after the previous top cop left the agency to face some federal charges. Over time, several potential suspects have been named in the case. Some have been named by official sources, and other independent groups have suggested there may be more involved, like former Suffolk County Chief James Burke. There are YouTube links online where the Gilbert family attorney shares his concerns about Burke and another suspect, Dr. Peter Hackett. Go back and check those out if you're interested. Now, a suspect that's really interesting to me is a convicted murderer by the name of John Bittrolf. He's a carpenter from Manorville, New York. Do you remember me saying something about Manorville earlier on? Bittrolf lived 3 miles from where the bodies of Jessica Taylor and Jane Doe number 6 were recovered. According to reports, his daughter was best friends with one of the victims in the case, Melissa Barthélemy. Barthélemy's mother said that her daughter Melissa had received a bunch of threatening and troubling calls around the time of her death from her phone. The calls were originating in Manorville. Really interesting. Then Joseph Brewer, an Oak Beach resident, popped to the surface. He was one of the last people known to have seen Shannon Gilbert alive. He hired her as an escort from Craigslist on the night of her disappearance. Now, Brewer said that shortly after Gilbert arrived at his residence, she began acting erratically and fled into the night. Gilbert was reported seen running through Oak Beach, remember, pounding on doors. And like I already mentioned, Gilbert called 911 saying, "Someone's trying to kill me." Well, according to online reports, police cleared Brewer as a suspect and maintained she died of an accidental drowning. Then there's an intriguing situation with Oak Beach resident Dr. Peter Hackett. He emerged as a suspect because 2 days after her disappearance, he called Gilbert's mother, saying that he ran a home for wayward girls. 3 days later, he denied that he had any contact. Wikipedia reports they confirmed the calls with Hackett's phone records. Police later ruled out Hackett as a suspect, though, in the deaths of Gilbert or any of the other victims. And now, in another strange twist, 2 days after Shannon Gilbert's remains were found, a guy named James Bissett, the developer of the Long Island Aquarium and Exhibition Center, was found dead in his car at Mattituck Park. Bissett owned a nursery in Holtzville, New York, and This is what's so interesting. Wikipedia and other media outlets report that the nursery was a major supplier of burlap in the region. Since so many articles mention this, I thought I would include it, but I'm really unsure there's anything that ties Bissett to the crimes. Simply having a burlap business doesn't make you a serial killer. Well, last year, in January of 2020, Suffolk County Commissioner Geraldine Hart released the images of a belt that has been found at the crime scene with the letters HM or WH, depending on which way the belt is looked at. The belt is made for a larger person. It was found during the initial investigation near Ocean Parkway at Gilgo Beach, and police are hoping that just looking at it, it might spark some memory in someone. So I hope if it does spark a memory that you would reach out to the Suffolk County Police Department immediately. I want to take a minute and remind you again to visit the story map that we created. You'll learn more about the case. So here's the question that I have for all of you. Do you think the Long Island serial killer is a single predator or multiple killers? And then I really want your answer on this one. Do you think Shannon Gilbert was killed by the Long Island serial killer, or did she die from exposure, only to be found in the same killing fields as the Gilgo Beach victims? Please hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell so that you receive more notifications like this one. You know, there's always hope in solving these old, cold cases. Police continue to investigate this case, so if you know something, say something. Call the Suffolk County Police Department at 631-852-COPS. That's COPS. And thanks for watching. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.